Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this Cabinet meeting. I'm Councillor Susie Horton. I'm the Deputy Leader of the Council, and I'm going to be chairing this meeting. Just a little bit of housekeeping to start off with. Safety information: if the continuous fire alarm sounds, please evacuate the room and public gallery by the stairwells. Don't use the lifts, and assemble at Queen Victoria's statue in Guildhall Square. And please sign out if you have signed in on your way in. Everyone speaking via microphone will be recorded and broadcast on the website, including those making deputations, but I don't think we have any deputations today. Members of the press and public are permitted to record the meeting on the understanding that it neither disrupts or records those stated explicitly they don't want to be recorded. So I don't think that's a case here. Please, can everyone use the microphones and remember to switch them off when they've finished? We have read all the reports. So for officers presenting reports, if you could highlight any developments that have occurred since the publication, or to highlight key points that you want to get across in this meeting. Okay, so introductions. I will start on my right today.
Hello, I'm Helen Dickerson. I'm the Deputy Monitoring Officer.
Okay, shall we? I'll go down to Darren then.
Hello, I'm Darren Sanders. I'm the Cabinet Member for Housing and Tackling Homelessness.
Matthew Willington, Cabinet Member for Community Wellbeing, Health and Care.
Kimberly Barrett, Cabinet Member for Climate Change and Greening the City.
Gerald Thurn-Jackson, Cabinet Member for Transport.
Yeah, Councillor Lee Hunt. I'm the Cabinet Member for Resources. I think my seat has dropped. Yes, it's not me. I'm sitting in somebody else's seat.
Thank you for letting us know that, Councillor Hunt.
Councillor Ian Holder, Cabinet Member for Safety in the Community.
Dave Ashmore, Cabinet Member for Environmental Services.
Lorna Reevely, Chief Officer of the Hive Portsmouth.
Catherine Ramsey, Cultural Leisure Reg Services.
Bob White, Chair of Hive Portsmouth.
Ian Maguire, Assistant Director for Economic Growth and Planning.
Adrian Rosier, Parks Development Manager.
Anna Martin, Democratic Services.
And Julian Pike, Deputy Director of Finance.
Welcome, everyone. So, next item, or the first item, is apologies. So I have apologies from Councillor Hugh Mason, who's on leave, from David Williams, who's on leave, from Chris Ward, who's represented by Julian Pike, as Chris is in another meeting, Stephen Bailey, who's represented by Catherine in this occasion, Jane Lemaire, who's represented by Ian, and it says Rebecca, but I can't see Rebecca, so Ian. Andy Biddle will probably be running a bit late. I think he says 2:40, so might juggle things. We'll see how the time goes. And also Councillor Steve Pitt has another meeting. So that has done the apologies. So the second item is declarations of interest. Does anyone have declarations of interest? Councillor Sanders.
Yes, I have a prejudicial interest in the article on mandatory licensing of HMOs, as I live in a HMO that is under mandatory licensing. So I will leave the meeting at that stage.
Okay, hence it being at the end. That's very sensible. Right, okay, so item 3, record of previous decision, meeting on the 25th of July. Do Cabinet see this as an accurate record of that meeting? Yes, thank you. All agreed? That's great, thank you. So item 4 is the forward plan emission notice about Christmas lights 2023 and supporting infrastructure and Christmas lights provision. Ian, do you want to introduce this briefly? I think we've read it quite a few times, but please highlight the important bits and anything you want to say.
The emission notice, no identity, stands on its own merit.
Of course, beg your pardon.
Scrutiny Management Panel.
So, I'm assuming we just agree, oh yes, that's item 5. Beg your pardon, that's my fault. So I assume we just agree that can go. Lee, Councillor Hunt.
Yeah, I'm happy to agree it, but we'll go on to the Christmas lights one next.
Okay. Everyone else in agreement with that? Okay, so item 5. Sorry, now coming to you, Ian. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So, yes, as members have read the report, this is a proposal to utilise citywide SIL funding, although alternative funding sources through ward-based SIL are detailed in the proposed recommendations, to fund both infrastructure improvements and new light motif. So 179 infrastructure, basically plugs on lampposts, and 130 new lights at a total cost of £122,000 to ensure that the Christmas lights can be provided for this Christmas, 2023, at a standard equal or better than they were last Christmas, where we did see a number of lights fail in that point, so they are to be replaced and upgraded. So we have hopefully a much better display of Christmas lights over a number of different sites listed in the appendix to the report. Happy to take any questions, but hopefully it is a straightforward request.
Many thanks. Members, any comments or questions? Councillor Hunt.
Yeah, thank you, Ms Maguire, for bringing this report so quickly. And I'd just like to say that here, at least in the Cabinet and across the administration, that we're keenly aware that retail is having a hard time. So Christmas and New Year trade is especially important to shoppers and businesses alike. So these festive lights, these improved festive lights, add to the enjoyment of the season for our high street and district centres and help to attract shoppers citywide. So that's my comment, and I'm very pleased that we're going to keep on investing in our retail areas so far as we can.
Thank you. Does anyone else want to make a comment or ask a question? No, I think it's straightforward. The only thing I would add, just to endorse what Councillor Hunt has said, is that I represent an area which had the Christmas lights come to it sort of a few years ago, and that was done after consultation with the businesses along those areas, Winter Road and also in Fawcett Road. And I think it's one of those things that adds. Sometimes it's difficult to quantify and measure the impact of this, but that people feel there's a different atmosphere around Christmas, and traders have fed back that actually that enhances their opportunities during that period of time. It just makes people feel nice as well when they see lots of nice twinkly lights. So thank you very much for the report, and Cabinet, I'm assuming from the comment and no desire to ask any other questions, that we support it. Great, thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Ian.
Just with one, obviously, there were two different funding sources available to Cabinet to support. I'm assuming it is the citywide SIL,
yes.
Which
yes.
is the preference.
Yes. Agreed. Thank you. Okay, item 6, which is the disposal of open space at King George V playing field. Who is presenting this? So Adrian, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. As you say, you've taken it in the report. It is just it's a follow-up report related to the facilities being built at King George V playing field, and they're to be leased to an operator. The area involved is the new pavilion, the artificial grass pitches and associated car parking. The grass pitches, they will be licensed, but that's only for times when matches are taking place. And the majority of the time, the site will remain accessible for informal use and events. This needs to follow an advertising process, as it is a lease of land, and any comments received to be considered. We received one comment, but that was in relation to the site operator rather than in relation to the open space. We are working with Hampshire FA. They are our preferred operator for the site. They already have a good relationship with the local clubs and leagues, and they'll be working with clubs over the next few months to develop the usage programme for the AGPs, and work's progressing well on site, and we expect the new facility to be complete before the end of the year.
Many thanks. Any comments or questions?
Councillor
Hunt.
Yeah, I'm really keen on sport in this city and the sports economy. It's been one of my joys as a member of this council to see how much we have invested into sport across the city. Adrian, remember how we did the massive tennis provision across the city. We've substantially increased the gymnastics centre, and we work with all sorts of sports governing bodies. And now, with this massive investment across the city, not just here, but across the city, in partnership with the FA and local clubs, we're seeing this new facility come up at KG5. It always strikes me as extraordinary that our colleagues up there in Cosham, not the current councillors, apart from one, the Conservative councillors previously, opposed this tooth and nail. And I just didn't really get it. I mean, it was a big win for Cosham and the residents there. We now see more improved facilities. The pavilion has been done. This administration has made sure of that. And now we're seeing that all weather pitches, the AstroTurfs come online so that more people can play more football more of the year around. And we've only seen the success of the England women's football team recently, the Rosies, how well that they have done. So this sport is for women, for men, for boys, for girls, for everybody. And to see our city right at the forefront of it, at the grassroots level, excuse the pun, is just phenomenal. And I am extremely proud and extremely grateful for the work of the officers across the years who have brought us to this point. So I'm pleased to see us working with Hampshire FA, and I know that Adrian does a tremendous job around parks, open spaces, sports and provision, and it's just tremendous, and I think it's wonderful to see it happening here. At this occasion in the north of the city, we often get hammered by some of our opponents who want to pretend that there's this north-south divide. There is not. Portsmouth is one city, and we share it out equally. I could go on, and you know I could go on, but it is fantastic to see. So thank you to Adrian, everybody else involved. And one last thank you is to all the coaches of these lads and lassies, of these football teams, generally voluntary. The coaches are the key. We provide facilities, but coaches are really the key to unlocking the potential of all these young sportsmen and women.
Councillor Sanders.
Thank you. I'm not sure I can quite follow that, but it's just interesting as a councillor both on the eastern side of the city and a councillor in Portsmouth North, just to show the other side of what Lee was saying, which is that this is part of a major investment this Liberal Democrat administration is making in youth provision across the city, particularly in the weak areas, which we know are the areas outside of council estates on the eastern side of the city and in the north. This is part of a package. This is not alone. The work that Adrian and the rest of the team are doing is amazing at KG5. We will make Bransbury much better than it is now because of the massive investment making that a real community hub, and also supporting the work of pumping the community in my own ward at Moneyfields, which we all hope will happen very soon, trying to actually improve youth provision on the eastern side of the city, which is chronically under-resourced in terms of that. And as Susie and Lee have said, also in the north of the city as well, this is yet another 8-figure investment in the north of the city. And long may that continue. Thank you, Susie.
Any other comments or questions? I think it's really good to give the bigger picture of this, and I have to say I invited myself up for a little tour the other day because I kept reading papers about it, and I thought I actually want to go and see it, and I was, well, Adrian will testify to the fact that I was quite shocked at how impressive the development is, and it is going to be an incredible addition. However, this item is really about the lease, and we need to make sure that we stay focused on that. So oh, sorry, Councillor Winnington, did you want to say something? Sorry, I didn't realise, didn't see your hand up, sorry.
I only just put it up, Deputy Leader. Just on the, obviously, in terms of, I'm very happy to go with the recommendation around the lease. And I think that's having good partners running sporting projects, which is all about, and obviously being the Cabinet member responsible for public health and wellbeing, it's really important that we have these facilities available and we have good partners that we work with right across the city, which is really going to enable people to have the best health and well-being outcomes that we can. And we can only do that by having good facilities run by good partners right across this city. So I'm really pleased with the fact that this has been developed, and I'm really pleased that we are looking to partner with, as has been mentioned, with Hampshire Football Association, which is our preferred partner. But whoever it is, in all our different places where people can get activity, it's really important that we have really good partners who want to partner. But it also shows they want to partner with us. And that shows the success of the work we're doing as a city council, as an administration in particular. But yeah, the most importantly is that we're getting the best outcomes for people right across this city, lots of different provision where they can enjoy as good health and well-being outcomes as possible, and of course, mostly have a lot of fun.
Thank you. Any more questions, comments? So, do Cabinet want to endorse a recommendation around the lease? Yes. Thank you very much, everyone. And so item 7 is Portsmouth City Council's strategic relationship with the Hive Portsmouth. So I'm going to hand over to Rebecca.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, so the purpose of this report really is to support the ongoing development of the partnership between Hive Portsmouth and Portsmouth City Council, and to approve the memo of understanding between both us and Hive Portsmouth. There's an advanced draft of the MOU attached, which has been now reviewed by Legal and Hive and PCC. The report's quite detailed about the work that was undertaken during COVID and then since COVID, and we've summarised as well some of the activities that's happening just now and ongoing. But actually, Lorna and Father Bob have came and kindly said they would do an update, if you're happy.
First of all, apologies. I said to Rebecca, and as I said it, I realised it was Catherine, so beg your pardon. And secondly, yes, happy for Bob to pick up and give a bit more information.
Thank you. I mean, my day job, I spend a lot of time looking at people's life journeys and dealing with different phases of life. And I was reflecting on how Hive started off 5 years ago as a very bright young thing, full of aspiration and hopes and dreams and wishes of all the wonderful things we'd achieve. Quickly went into the teenage years as COVID arrived with frenetic and off-the-wall activity, which wasn't planned or anyway chaotic. Typical teenage life. And then we've now reached our adulthood. And in adulthood, it's about taking responsibility. It's about looking at the partnerships that we form and having stable relationships and investing in our future. And that's where we are today. That's what I think the Memorandum of Understanding and the partnership with the City Council is about Hive now in its maturer years, taking responsibility for its actions, but looking to have good, stable relationships with those in the city who support us. We're not going to go through the whole report, because I know that's not what you do. But Lorna's just going to share a bit of a quick update of where we've been since the report was written, with some more of our recent performances.
Thank you. So I joined Hive about 15 months ago now, with an initial remit to review the risks, identify opportunities, and strengthen our operational and governance structures. But relationship building has been a key focus, particularly important as I've been working in Southampton for the last 9 years. So actually being back in the city was amazing. But it was also really important to understand where all the activities of Hive fit into the priorities of all of our partners. So a lot of that work is underway or completed now. But we've had some great successes over the last year. We've had 1,039 new volunteers placed in roles across the city. We've seen school readers introduced into 3 local schools, and Therefore Care volunteers placed both in care homes and in the community. This has meant we've seen volunteers completing just less than 3,000 hours of volunteering and supporting one-off city events such as the International Kite Festival. If we put a value on that to the city, it's just less than £43,000 just in volunteering alone. And that's just the volunteer hours that we're aware of. Some of the volunteers we place go into organisations that we don't log their hours, so that could probably be increased quite dramatically. Our help desk continues to offer a single point of contact with 2,747 face-to-face visitors last year, 2,955 telephone calls and 2,268 emails inquiries. And in the first 3 months of this year, we've had 644 visitors, 695 phone calls and 228 emails. That's not an insignificant number of residents we're supporting. The Directory of Service is continually updated with an average of 829 organisations' information held to signpost both residents and professionals to community-based support. And we've had 1,081 families and 1,545 children supported through our free school uniform shop. This year, up until the end of July, that's been 343 families with 456 children. Those numbers are set to rise dramatically after a really busy summer period. Supporting other organisations or new development has remained a priority, and capacity building to ensure a resilient sector remains a core goal of the Hive Portsmouth. Throughout last year, our team dealt with 130 inquiries from individuals or groups interested in starting new community groups. We supported 228 social enterprises and dealt with 4,385 funding inquiries. Regular Connect and networking events continued through the year, and that gave people the opportunity to meet local volunteers and representatives from community groups and organisations in order to share news, update on projects. And we also introduced new focused networking sessions around environmental issues, children and young people, and social care. A follow-up state of the sector survey was carried out in early 2023 to understand the impact that the cost of living crisis is having across the sector. Initial results were highlighted in the follow-up cost of living event in February, where we arranged for a number of organisations from the sector to present the impact that the crisis is having on them as organisations, their staff and beneficiaries, which brought to life the real human cost of the crisis across the city. A full report was published in June, and we're working to develop support for those most affected, particularly the smaller groups. We've also supported both the Dynamite Group and Portsmouth Parent Voice, ensuring young people and parents of young people with SEND had a voice. Dynamite has now successfully transitioned to another organisation in the city, MAKE, and PPV are due to transition to Home Start as part of the collaborative Family Hub bid in October. We launched our Hive Portsmouth Hub in June 2023 with funding provided by BAE, which offers an affordable co-working space in the city for small community organisations and the ability to collaborate. BAE further support this initiative with regular drop-in HR sessions, and a training offer for the sector is also in development based on some of the intel we got from the State of the Sector report. Hive also continues to host the Portsmouth Lottery with a total of £16,062 distributed to support local groups. But that's not all. There's a number of other projects we're involved in across the city. As part of the citywide response to the cost of living crisis, Hive Portsmouth has been supporting local communities to set up pantries across the city. Pantries go beyond the food bank model, creating a more sustainable and long-term solution to food poverty. There are 7 pantries in place and plans for a further 3. We also offered additional support by distributing £50,000 worth of funding from the Partnership Trust to food banks and pantries across the city, ensuring the availability for those most at risk of food insecurity across the city. Our Community Mental Health Transformation Project set up an independent expert panel, including service users, those with lived experience, experts by experience, carers and VCSU sector partners. The Lived Experience Network had 44 members, and the team ensured that people with lived experience contributed to a successful campaign for young people, You Are Not Alone. They held pathway workshops, supported the interview process and induction of the Portsmouth Mental Health Hub staff, and have been involved in outreach visits to engage with people with serious mental illness. Our digital inclusion project focused on providing training for digital champions and improving access in community settings to digital devices. 17 digital champions were trained and available to support residents through the year, and the health access kiosks were installed both at the Central Library and Citizens Advice Portsmouth. Further kiosks are planned for the Spark Community Cafe and the John Pound Centre. Drop-in sessions are held in the library once a month with volunteers from Citizens Advice Portsmouth and Age UK Portsmouth alongside Hive volunteers. And we've also supported GP surgeries in the city to encourage patients to set up and access their online services. The project's also exploring how our homeless residents can remain connected with free data and devices, working alongside the Society of St James, Two Saints and the City of Sanctuary. To date, the project has supported 167 residents with 212 hours of volunteering. We also supported the formation of the Disability Advisory Group, a group established and run by disabled people, which is working both proactively to identify issues of concern to those with physical disabilities and reactively as a sounding board for local organisations looking for specific advice. The Wellbeing Collective is a pilot project now in its second year, which aims to avoid unnecessary hospital admissions and additional pressures on health services by working collectively with British Red Cross and the Salvation Army. During the first year of the project, 434 referrals were received, with 3,056 hours of professional support from health colleagues saved, which equates to a cost saving of about £40,000. Age UK Portsmouth and the Good Gym have recently been awarded funding to build capacity in the city for this project. We're also a co-applicant on the Health Determinants Research Collective bid, and if successful, we'll host the Community Research Office within the hub, alongside our project in partnership with Solent NHS, developing community resident researchers, which will further strengthen the skills and social action within local communities. All of this work is set to continue, and we also have future aspirations, including continuing to develop our partnerships, strengthening the VCSE sector in the city with increased insight and information to be able to influence decisions and see them as an equal partner in the city. We've got the development of the North Co-working Hub, hopefully in Paulsgrove, and we're involved in the Paulsgrove Asset-Based Community Development Project. We're potentially taking on an operational role within the Youth Investment Fund within Chaucer House, which is all about youth provision in the city, and we're supporting the co-production of that offer with the VCSE. We continue to support the development of the HIFCA and ensure that Portsmouth have a strong voice within the ICB, as well as the development of the neighbourhood model for health and care within the city. Alongside this, we continue to develop our strategic plan, and we're looking to secure more sustainable funding for Hive Portsmouth.
Thank you, Sir Lorna. When we do our marriage preparation courses, we get the couples to make sure they know each other well and that they're not entering blindly into a relationship and a partnership and then to discover things that they wish they'd known before. We hope that what today we've shared with you gives you a good insight into the breadth and the depth of Hive and its importance within the city as an equal partner with the statutory authorities, and that's why we hope you'll support fully the Memorandum of Understanding and the paper you've got before you.
Huge thanks to you all for that kind of overview, and I think it's really nice to have that first-hand story of what's been going on for us to add to the report. I'm going to just use sort of chair's privilege a bit to kick off on this because I've always been a fan of the Hive right from the beginning, and I really love the analogy you set off there with Bob about growing up, because I think it's really important. But I also think you could see yourselves as a kind of young adult now. I look back when I first started my career, and actually, you know, I knew more than I did when I was a teenager, and I was different, but actually you grow and surround yourselves by the right people, and it's important to be able to pull on, you know, in this case, different partners, but to keep talking, because everything's not perfect, but we need to keep those relationships, as you say, fluid and going on. I think it feels to me as if it's moving into very much a strategic equal. Coming onto the Health and Wellbeing Board, I think, is a really positive move. We've known for ages that actually, I think initially there was a lot of feeling around filling in gaps that the council could no longer fund, so that, you know, the voluntary and community sector could pick up some of that slack. But actually it's more than that now. It's about working together, standing side by side and actually looking at some of these, the needs of the city and who best is placed to make them. And a few of those are close to my heart, as you know, around the uniforms. But also, I think Dynamite is a really good example about how there needed to be a holding place for it. And actually it matured and there is another model which is going to work and build on the successes of that. So I think from my point of view, the council's relationship with the Hive should remain in that space around actually planning together, moving forward, understanding the different identities, but actually just constantly coming back to meeting the needs of the people in Portsmouth in relation to the services that we're developing as well as a council. So thank you so much for that information. It's really heartening to hear that summary. And I'm sure some of my colleagues, I know Councillor Winningston will want to add to that. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Susie, and thank you to Lorna and Bob for coming along today and presenting to us. It's unlike most in this room, I've had lots of dealings with the Hives outside the council, working as I have for many years in the voluntary community social enterprise sector in the city. And I was actually just talking to Caroline from the Hive on Saturday when I was up at the PO6 events in Paulsgrove. And we were just discussing about the work that, about the networking meetings, which is one of the most simple but really useful things to bring together people from the voluntary community and social enterprise sector in the city. And I've had discussions with Innes Richins, who used to be our head of social services, adult services here at the City Council, and heading up the CCG around stuff to do with disabilities, and indeed I'll be meeting with him in the next few weeks around strategic partnership within health and care, and about how the Hive can help support the voluntary community social enterprise sector engage with that space and with those services, but also work together to create more. And of course, one of the things is the Hive's already doing some of that, because especially around the mental health transformation, having been commissioned by Health and Care Portsmouth to lead on the engagement with people in the community around mental health services and that side of it. So I think Susie's been very clear there as well, that it's been a case of evolution. It's been about things changing. It's been about having those, not just having those conversations, but the Hive developing as an organisation, having their own hub now, having being commissioned to do things themselves. But also, it's about how can we do more? Because, as Susie said, it's not just about the VCSE and therefore the Hive supporting the VCSE and representing them, plugging gaps. It's about how we can actually bring all of our services together, whether it be statutory, voluntary community social enterprise sector, and indeed the private sector as well, into doing things in the best way possible. And if we leave out any of these, so for many years we've had Shaping Portsmouth and the teams there that brought together a lot of the private sector, and that's been going on for a very long time. We've had a lot of business things that brings it together, but we haven't had until now a really mature organisation to bring the VCSE together within the city. I remember when we were when it was first set up, the Hive, and one of the big things was about volunteering, and I think that's where a lot of it started off, but it's just become much, much more than that. And so I'm really looking forward to working closer in the future. I'd like to thank everyone at the Hive for the work they do. And as I say, I know, having worked in the sector, in the VCSE sector locally, what a difference the Hive makes. And I'm sure that as we move forwards and have a better strategic partnership, work with the Hive as strategic partners, and work with the whole of the VCSE, with the Hive at the centre of it, we can do more and more in the city, because we know that when the city comes together, we are at our very best, and the Hive is absolutely a part of that.
Thank you. Anyone else want to ask a question or make a comment? Councillor Sanders.
Thank you, Susie. If I can make a few comments, that would be lovely. I think Father Bob's analogy of the marriage is quite reasonable. So I think from the other side of the marriage, if we were Father Bob, I think we entered into the marriage believing that working together will make our city better and take our city forwards. I think we all believe that a lot of the work we do is around helping people help themselves and helping our communities help themselves. And I think the first point we're being asked to agree, which is the work that you did during the pandemic, remains nothing short of sensational. I know from bringing in hundreds of sofa surfers, hundreds of rough sleepers at a few days' notice, that without the Hive, many of them just wouldn't have had food. And many of them wouldn't have had the provisions that they needed. And that work and the other work is utterly sensational. And I think that's when the marriage weathered its first crisis, really, and a very significant crisis that will lead to many, many divorces in many cases. But it didn't. And then it became, well, as we emerged from the pandemic, well, what are we going to do next? What's the next phase of this marriage, a calmer phase of this marriage? I think working together, it's around, again, how do we make communities help themselves? How do we help people help themselves get on, particularly during the cost of living crisis? I'm acutely aware of the work the Hive has done around the pantries. In my housing hat, I've authorised 2 community buildings in order to become pantries in Paulsgrove and in Somerstown. And I know the Hive, the council, and me and my fellow Baffins Ward colleagues have invested a lot of money in the pantry in my own ward to try and make that happen. Now, some of us believe that you shouldn't need to rely on food banks. You shouldn't need to rely on pantries, but unfortunately the times we live in means that we do. And so therefore we have to make it work. And therefore we have done it. It's not always been easy. I think that's reasonable. But I think it's been essential. And I think the next stage of the marriage, and I don't regard the memorandum of understanding as prenuptial agreement, or indeed the meetings as marriage guidance, is actually to see how we can take this city forward. Because we want to make the city better. The city is recovering from a once-in-a-100-year pandemic, and what it has to do is to be the best place it can be. We all want that to happen, and I think what we've got today will help a lot of people make that happen, and hopefully take this marriage forward into the Hive's middle age and pensionable years. Thank you, Susie.
I think we'll quit there before we get on to children and grandchildren. Anyway, thank you. Any other comments or questions from members? So coming back to the recommendations, I think we've appreciated the Hive lots and looked at the renewed focus, but the most important thing is about approving the memorandum of understanding between Portsmouth City Council and Hive Portsmouth. Are we all in agreement with that, Cabinet? Great, thank you very much. Which is great. Those stories were great because it allowed Andy Biddle to join us. Do you want to introduce yourself, first of all, and then we're going to chuck you straight into doing your report?
Thank you, Chair. Andy Biddle, Director of Adult Social Care for Portsmouth. My apologies, I was detained at another meeting.
It couldn't have worked out more perfectly. So we're going to go on to that agenda item now, which is the discharge to assess. So I will hand over to you.
Thank you. So the paper's in front of you. I just bring a few highlights from it for attention. So the purpose of bringing it here really is to talk about the potential financial risk to the council. More importantly to that is there is a risk to some of our residents that we do need to bear in mind as we go through this paper as well in terms of those people that go through our hospital. So under the recommendations, we're recommending that we consider restricting discharge to assess to those fully funded resources that we have in Portsmouth. That we're asking Cabinet to endorse that will only be committed to those schemes that are achievable and supported by funding in Portsmouth. And that we write to the ICB, or you ask me to write to the ICB to ask if they have any additional funds to add to discharge to assess. Under Section 3, under the background, there's a fair amount of technical detail in terms of the way that the law has changed over time and the way that funding for discharge has also changed over time. We were referencing briefly earlier on the pandemic. There was quite a significant fund during the pandemic to discharge people from hospital. That wasn't capped, certainly in its first iteration, and it wasn't as capped as it is now in its second iteration. It was based on need and demand. But what we find now is that that's been replaced by something called a discharge grant, made variously both to ourselves and to the NHS, and that's capped in the amount that it's made each year. I'd also draw your attention to the analysis that we did in 2022, and we asked our finance colleagues to do this for us, as we see them as reasonably independent arbiters, because they look at the cash, they look at what we've spent, and they come up with a very clear answer. And the conclusion from that analysis was that under discharge to assess, around 52% of the people we saw we wouldn't normally have seen, i.e. they wouldn't necessarily have had needs that would be appropriate for social care to intervene, or they would have had those needs met elsewhere, or they would have had funding and resources to be able to meet their own needs. So I think that sort of indicates we're seeing a lot more people than we were doing prior to discharge to assess. Continuing through that section, we do have a financial risk at the top of the third page of the report, sorry. When we can't respond, when we can't get to people to assess them within a 4-week time frame, the NHS funding ceases and that burden is set against the council. We have had difficulties with meeting that criteria, with meeting that time frame, and we do, as we go further into the report, have people that are waiting for that assessment. But regardless of that, we've still got a financial allocation against the council. There's a helpful pathway, and I'm grateful to my colleague Simon Nightingale for putting that in there, that it shows in quite simple terms, quite accessible terms, I think, on how somebody comes out of hospital and the options available to them. So that's there for some context. And then moving through the graphs at the base of page 4 of the report, we're basically demonstrating how many people are coming through the system, how many people then wait for assessment, and that's one of our major concerns given our financial liability. So moving on to section 4 and the reasons for our recommendations, the number of spot placements, i.e. care packages that we're purchasing outside of already funded arrangements, are way more than the original calculations we used to set up this method of discharge for people. On the next paragraph, demonstrating that the figure of the funding from the ICB does change week by week because it very much depends on how many people come through, how long they spend in the system. So the ICB money currently is sufficient to see us through until May next year, but that may change within this financial year, which is why we're trying to be fairly prompt and bring that paper for your consideration now. We've then got a table on the next page that sets out how that funding is calculated, which is quite helpful. And then we've got a summary just talking about why we're here. Many of our residents who are discharged don't have eligible care needs. They may have needs for some kind of support, but that's not necessarily eligible for adult social care intervention. But they may garner support coming out of hospital and discharge to assess that then ends up being a financial liability against the council until we can make an assessment under our Care Act duties. So what we're proposing, just to recap, is that we restrict discharge to assess. Once the money isn't available, we restrict discharge to assess to those funded schemes. It's important to hold on to that as well. We do have funded schemes for people to come out of hospital. We're really pleased that we've been able, after many years, to come up with an integrated discharge to assess and rehab unit on the first floor of Harry Sotnick House. We've wanted to do that for a long time. I think you all know our history of integrated working with our NHS colleagues, and it's a really positive thing that we've been able to get there. And that's about 40 beds as it stands at the moment, so it's not an insubstantial resource. But we are concerned about the uncapped liability to the council, if you like, about bringing people through more unfunded routes. We've then got legal implications set out there, which is a bit of a recap of what we've seen earlier. It talks about our statutory duties and where they come from. And then my colleagues kindly added finance colleagues that sets out the money, sets out what we've got currently and the concerns that we have. Hopefully that's a reasonable summary, but please do ask any questions.
Many thanks. Councillor Winnington. Comments?
Thank you. And thank you, Andy, for presenting the report. And I think I'll start by saying I'm really upset this report has had to come here because I'm really upset that we're now in this situation whereby we're having to make these mitigation measures because so far we haven't had discharge to assess properly funded by central government. There weren't many good things to come out of the pandemic, but this was one of them because it was out of necessity. And finally, we got a model that's right around the country that's, as Andy has just said, people wanted for a very, very long time, and there was finally funding to do it. We were very fortunate in the way that we work in Portsmouth because we work in an integrated fashion between the council, the NHS, that we were able to create an integrated unit on the top floor of Harry Sutton House, which was initially run by ourselves and then was handed over to be run by Stoke NHS. But we do that in an integrated fashion, which is fantastic. But unfortunately, we're now getting to the situation where the money that has been allocated by governments is not enough. It is getting to the point where we are going to run out of money. So on the paper, the money will run out. So let me just look again. On the 19th of May 2024, as of the time of the paper being done. As Andy said, things do change a bit and whatever, so it could get pushed back a bit, but the money will run out. And so therefore we have to mitigate against that, because otherwise we are going to land the City Council with enormous costs when we're already under severe financial pressure. And this really is the most frustrating thing. For something that by design, well, not by design, by accident effectively came in, and we know that discharge to assess saves money for councils, saves money for the NHS, saves money for the entire system, because you're effectively dealing with issues before they, you're dealing with issues right at the beginning, but you're stopping people from being in hospital unnecessarily, where we know that people deteriorate more if they're in hospital and they don't need to be. You have that opportunity to make sure they have the right kind of care at the right time. But now we're in a situation whereby we're not going to be able to do that to the extent that we've been doing before, and we're having to restrict it to those specific units rather than looking towards the community as a whole. And then we look at it from the Hampshire Isle of Wight basis. So Hampshire, Southampton and the Isle of Wight have all already got to this point. So we are lagging because we've got that integration and we've had that integration, and we were able to do that because our level of integration is far more than anywhere else's. But it's always going to come. So we've asked in the recommendation 3, which is about for Andy to write to the Integrated Care Board to see if they've got additional funding they're going to do. Quite frankly, I don't believe that will happen, but we should ask that question, because ultimately it's the government, it's the Department of Health and Social Care, it's NHS England who are not allocating that money to systems to do this. And that's where we're finding a real problem. So my call out of this, as what I would always do in this public meeting, is that I would say to the government, why are you costing every taxpayer in this country more money because you can't get yourself in gear to understand that if you prevent things from happening, it costs you less money. We see this time and time and time again, where targets are all about treatment rather than prevention. You get people out of hospital as soon as you can, you will prevent them going back into hospital or deteriorating in hospital where they can't be discharged. That's where you need to put your funding in, that's where you need to do things, and you need to do it now. So I thank Andy for this report. I support the recommendations, but I'm very, very upset that we're having to go down this line, that we're having to make changes to a system that works, that has worked, is working, and can work well into the future, but we haven't got the funding to do it. So we need to ask for the funding, and I would hope as well, this will prompt the ICB to go up their line and go, we've been asked about this funding, where is it? Because that's the only way that people are going to listen. And we know right across the country, from a local authority point of view and the local systems point of view, so the local NHS in all those places, they want this funding, they want to do this, because they know that it makes a massive difference.
Thank you, Councillor Winnington, for that very full and emotional and very, very fair and robust analysis of situations where we find ourselves having to make really unpalatable decisions because we have no choice. Anyone else want to add to that or ask a question? No? In which case, I'm assuming that Cabinet will support those recommendations that have been well versed. Agreed. Yes, agreed. Thank you, everyone, and thank you, Andy, for coming along and delivering the paper. So that brings us, I believe, to the last item. So Councillor Sanders is leaving as he has an interest in this. And it is on mandatory licensing of houses of multiple occupation. So I think that Claire is going to present the report. Usual thing, Claire, that we have read it, just to highlight the key points. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So Cabinet made a decision on the 22nd of November last year to introduce additional licensing of all houses of multiple occupation in Portsmouth. This decision included an agreement to a new approach to licensing properties where licence holders will be given different terms of licence based upon certain criteria, a new fee structure to reflect this, and new licence conditions. Through that November decision report, Cabinet instructed officers to present a further report to Cabinet with proposals to alter the current mandatory licensing scheme to mirror those decisions made. So on the 25th of July this year, Cabinet considered a report outlining the proposals to align the two schemes and instructed officers to conduct a non-statutory consultation with existing HMO licence holders. This report presents the findings of that consultation and asks Cabinet to make a final decision on whether or not to align those two schemes. Just as a very high-level overview of the results of that consultation, we had 143 current licence holders respond to the survey, which is over a 20% response rate, and overall 73% were in agreement with the proposals, so the vast majority. The recommendations of the report are that Cabinet notes the outcome of that non-statutory consultation, that the Cabinet, in light of the consultation results, it's recommended change the mandatory HMO licensing scheme as outlined in this report. This includes agreeing to a new approach to administering licenses for different terms as outlined in Appendix 2, new licence fee structure as outlined in Appendix 3, and new licence conditions as outlined in Appendix 4. Cabinet should agree, it was recommended, that changes agreed will be implemented from the 1st of December this year, which means that any licences due to expire on or after the 1st of December, or any new applications received on or after the 1st of December, will be administered through that new scheme as outlined in the report. And finally, Cabinet should instruct officers to conduct an annual review of the fee structure for mandatory licensing alongside the already agreed annual review for additional licensing fees. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire. Any comments or questions? Councillor Hunt.
I'm glad to see the increasing acceptance from the industry, the landlords, around HMOs. And I think that given time, some of the misunderstanding or the misconceptions around the HMOs will begin to abate. As we see the licenses, these aligned licenses and regulatory schemes aligning, and that means that people living in them will be happier, and if they're happier, the landlords will be happier, and if everybody else is happy, then the residents around them will be happy. So we're going to have a happy city, which we already have, of course. But I mean, these are really good steps to be taking, you know, to improve the quality of life for people in HMOs, to hopefully begin to reduce complaints around HMOs, which we hear about so much in planning and are used as a political stick to whack the council around the head sometimes. And we're going to keep on seeing improvements over. It's not going to happen immediately, but as we worm out HMOs that are substandard, that residents are being treated badly, things will begin to improve. It's going to take a long time, but we've set that train in motion, and I'm glad for it.
Thank you very much. Any other comments? Okay, Claire went through the recommendations in quite a lot of detail, so I'm not going to read them all through again, but is Cabinet happy to accept those recommendations? Thank you very much. Thanks, Claire, for the report, and thank you, members, and that brings us to the end of the meeting. So thank you very much. Have a good rest of the afternoon. Thank you.